I want to now deliver a kind of brickbat to Helen Clark, Jenny Shipley, Tony Blair, and all the other former politicians who do now hold non-elected positions, who somehow seem to think that they have a right, because they were elected once, to tell people, not just here in New Zealand, but around the globe, what to do. Helen Clark is now, with the assistance of the taxpayer and universities, running her own little cult of personality called the Helen Clark Foundation. And the Helen Clark Foundation is not publicly accountable. It has never talked to me as a journalist in all the years it's been operated. And Helen Clark picks and chooses what journalists she talks to. Generally, she only talks to journalists who agree with her, because she is, of course, the grandmother of cancel culture in New Zealand. But I just want to read to you a story by, I presume, some 20-year-old with pimples called Aaron Darman. That was page 2 of the Post newspaper this morning, published, of course, by staff. World leaders are reigniting calls for a pandemic agreement to be finalised more than 2 years since negotiations began. Among them is former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Helen Clark, who told Stuff's daily news podcast, Newsable, that it's almost incomprehensible that no resolution has been reached, with May 2024 deadline now just weeks away. Well, I'm going to ask you a question. Is Helen Clark a world leader? She is a former Prime Minister of New Zealand and former head of the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. And that's where it ends. Helen Clark holds no elected position. Helen Clark has no mandate to be a world leader. And as far as I know, there is no world government that she is part of. So the very headline, Aaron, is completely misleading. A bunch of old politicians who exercise more power than they are entitled to and considers themselves elite and above normal people say, is what your headline should have said. Clark apparently has added her name to an open letter. To whom? To whom? Oh, to woke journalists who'll republish it and do stories about it. Clark has added her name to an open letter alongside Dame Jenny Shipley and the likes of former United Nations General Secretary Ban Ki-moon and ex-UK Prime Ministers Gordon Brown and Tony Blair, who lied to the world and started a war in Iraq, urging accelerated progress on the global deal. None of those people, as far as I know, now hold elected positions. I think they're probably this group called the Elders, which is some sort of Masonic lodge that Helen Clark belongs to. And these World Health Organisation's regulations, if one can call them that, have been extremely difficult, she said. The process does not seem to have been a good one. No, Helen, it hasn't, because you haven't asked people about it. And elites like you have decided that you will run the agenda rather than talking to people. Now, I'm sorry, I don't need Helen Clark, and we don't need Helen Clark and Tony Blair and Jenny Shipley. We need a government that has experts, that makes decisions and is accountable to us. Helen Clark says she's shocked, but not surprised, because the response to COVID-19 should have told us, I guess, how waffle thin global commitments to equitable access were. Equitable access. Oh, so this is a political message, Helen, about equitable access, or is it about the health of New Zealanders? Because that's what I'm concerned about, the health of New Zealanders. She says these are hardcore issues of equity. No, they're presumably, Helen, issues of health and the safety of New Zealanders. Unless, I'm sorry, you're part of some world government that isn't accountable to anyone, because you're certainly not accountable to New Zealanders, because you pick and choose who you talk to media-wise, while still, in one way or other, sucking on the government and the taxpayers' tip. Anyway, she's shocked, blah, 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 blah. She said in a pandemic, agreement is about avoiding another catastrophe like COVID-19. Was it a catastrophe? We took hard measures. It was a catastrophe for supply chains and a lot of people. Did we respond correctly? Well, we're having a review now and we're asking questions about whether or not we responded correctly. And that's, I guess, we're doing that through an accountable process, which has been made more robust by the change of government in New Zealand. And I guess, Helen, you should probably leave it up to the body politic, to elected representatives and voters to decide what the response was. It is not your place to decide how the world should be and tell us what the truth is. It is your place to take your considerable superannuation from being the Prime Minister of New Zealand and being an MP and go and do good works without bossing people round. And by the way, Helen Clark did co-chair the World Health Organization's independent panel for pandemic preparedness and response, which delivered its primary report. Yes, it just sounds like a whole lot of bureaucratic crap, to be honest, Helen. And Stuff, I think, have just published a kind of propaganda puff piece, which doesn't raise any of the questions I have, I think legitimate questions about democracy and due process and sovereignty and how public policy is made. But we don't need to worry about that because Helen tells us she knows best. Helen Clark, I'd like to invite you onto the platform as I have many, many times before, and your people won't even return our calls. Helen Clark Foundation, they just never get back, do they, Ben? Nah, Ben says, they never get back. So, Helen, if you want to talk about this stuff, why not discuss what you're going to do to people or you want to do to people before you do it to them? And I challenge you to come on the program anytime you want and talk about why this is so important and explain to us why you, as a retired former Prime Minister, get to decide what is best for the rest of us.